What was behind that irresistible pull I felt towards those marvelous Nintendo player's guides back in the day? Perhaps it wasn't just me, so what made them so enticing? They were thin, slick volumes appetizingly colored and designed. To open them was to be overwhelmed with dazzling graphics and maps that gave me as much knowledge about a particular game as I could want. Especially back then, for me, a video game, when enough time was spent in it, became its own world. The shelf lined with cartridges was a library and a cosmos of various worlds, each with their own particularities and marvels. It was hoped that the player's guide for one of these games would encompass all aspects of the game and allow a complete understanding of it. The best games endure through time because they are microcosms and ritualized versions of some basic pattern of reality. They permit us to engage with the structure of the world, whether it be hierarchy and upward and downward movement, like chutes and ladders, competition and war, like chess or team sports, or the excitement and surprise of fortune, like dice or card games. While in our lives war is bloody, costly, and destructive, chess and football provide a boiled-down ritualized experience and practice of the same pattern, without the egregious consequences. In video games, we experience effort, perseverance, adversity, and adventure in cycles, as worlds or levels begin and end. We are celebrated for our success, and death is most often the image of our losses. The video game is a highly ritualized participation in cosmic patterns. This was what attracted me, the idea that all knowledge of a subject can be collected in one book, and one so pleasing to look at. It is also, interestingly enough, what spurred on medieval scholars to produce myriad codexes about the world they lived in, too. Those books were made, more or less, according to the medieval model, something which has practically been lost to us today. C.S. Lewis's book, The Discarded Image, can help us discern what this medieval model of the universe consisted of. This is the medieval synthesis of itself, the whole organization of their theology, science, and history into a single complex, harmonious mental model of the universe. We see how everything links up with everything else. In this model, things were organized in hierarchy, and so you had the heavens, with stars and heavenly bodies, the earth with man and the beasts. Somewhere in between heaven and earth, there were the Longevi, fairies, sprites, and that sort of folk. So room was even made for the wild and unknown elements of the world. Everything has its right place, its home, the region that suits it. Interestingly, the thinking once was that the stars were fixed and did not move, rendering the sky in a way like the skyboxes used to border 3D environments in video games. If we're speaking of the medieval era, perhaps a good place to start would be with the player's guide to The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. A beautifully illustrated and laid out book. As important as the actual game itself is, as well as the various items and enemies are, a good deal of attention is given to the backstory. This is lavishly presented and helps to inform the flavor and the mood of the world, not only as you read through the guide, but as you play the game as well. This is the metaphysical reality of the limited 16-bit world on screen. There was nothing which medieval people liked better, or did better, than sorting out and tidying up. Of all our modern inventions, I suspect that they would have most admired the card index. It seems that organizing information into various forms of categorization has never really gone out of style. Indeed, since Adam first sat down and named all the animals, cataloging is a distinctly human pursuit. The icebergs and the list videos so popular now are vivid proof of that. With our world being so vast, the world of video games is certainly more manageable in its items and taxonomies, making it feasibly fertile ground for the medieval-minded of us. These player's guides were usually organized as such: the backstory of the world of the game, those who populate it, specifically who you will be controlling and those nearest to them, as well as the anatomy and controls utilized in the game. Next we have items and objects of interest, that which you use in order to stay in good health or accomplish the goal of the game. Then there is the world of the game, the environments, and levels you'll traverse. Invariably accompanied by maps, there are details on where to go and what to do. Often the kinds of creatures you'll encounter will be listed before this section, or as part of it. Finally, there will be accounts of what happens after you beat the game, as well as variations on how to play it, or alternate modes, such as multiplayer. Any final pages are devoted to small secrets one can exploit within the game. However, the official guides, such as with Nintendo, almost never explained or encouraged the exploitation of glitches. And so it was in the unofficial guide to Super Mario 64 that I first learned of the infinite lives trick. These more obscure secrets could fall under the same realm as the black arts, and attempt to subvert the reality at hand to gain advantage. Something like the Game Shark functioned in this manner as a compendium of spells or cheats, which may or may not work, and may or may not lead to the corruption or crash of the game itself. The simplest form in which this tendency expresses itself is mere catalog. We have in Bernardus catalogs of hierarchies, stars, mountains, beasts, rivers, woods, vegetables, fish, and birds. Often in medieval literature there was the digression, which connected whatever was going on in the story to an aspect of the greater cosmology, be it through history, science, or nature. The player's guide often features many of these digressions, be they to aspects of lore to enrich the player's experience, as in Star Fox 64, or illustrate the genealogy of forms the various Mario characters have taken. One of the most commonly known form of medieval codexes was the Bestiary, a chronicle of not only various types of animals, ranging from the mundane and common to the exceedingly monstrous and rare. In the case of the Bestiary, there would be correlations between the animals and various stories from the Bible or elsewhere involving them. Essentially, not just the creature's biological character was accounted, but its symbolic and literary as well. The player's guide which best approximates this is that for the first Pokemon games. The detailed lists of their moves, strengths, weaknesses, as well as how they function as animals, paints a picture of how they fit into the world of the games. To a lesser extent, other guides feature sections on enemies which function in a merely cautionary manner, but still satisfy the categorical impulse. If a player's guide can be made about a game, then the game itself must have an order to it. However difficult and arduous that order is in discovering. You won't find a player's guide that questions whether the game can be beat, or speculates whether there is a point to it at all. In these games, comprehension of the order is possible because of the ordered nature of the game, allowing these books to be made about them in such completion. The same is borne out by our universe. Perhaps that is why there is much dedication to paying homage to the worlds of the most beloved video games and their myriad facets, not simply because it provides answers, but because there is a dazzling complexity in these games and their guides. Poets and other artists depicted these things because their minds loved to dwell on them. Other ages had not had a model so universally accepted as theirs, so imaginable, and so satisfying to the imagination. Every particular fact and story became more interesting and more pleasurable if, by being properly fitted in, it carried one's mind back to the model as a whole. In having mostly rejected the medieval form of cosmology long ago, man today finds the order of video games, fantasy films, and books a way to scratch where his soul itches.